September 3, 1939. Just after 11 a.m. Downing Street, London. The rain hangs low over the city, turning the streets slick and gray. Inside number 10, a red light glows in a quiet room, the signal that the nation is listening. Radios crackle to life across Britain, in factory offices, in village shops, in cramped living rooms where families sit unnaturally still. You can almost hear the country holding its breath. Neville Chamberlain steps forward. His voice is calm, measured, but tired. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note. There is a pause, a long one. And I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received. Another pause, then the words land. Consequently, this country is at war with Germany. For a moment there is no cheering, no celebration, just silence, a familiar silence, one Britain hoped it would never hear again. Because this war, this moment, was never supposed to happen. 21 years earlier, Britain had buried nearly 1 million of its sons. The First World War left scars deeper than monuments could ever show. Entire villages lost their young men. Entire families learned to live with empty chairs at the table. The Somme, Passchendaele, Ypres, names that still tasted like blood and mud. By 1918, Britain wasn't victorious, it was exhausted. In the years that followed, peace wasn't just policy, it was a promise to the dead, to the survivors, to a generation that believed war itself was the enemy. Politicians spoke of never again. Mothers believed them, fathers demanded it, and for a long time Britain shaped its entire future around avoiding another catastrophe. Through the 1920s, Britain cut its military, battleships were scrapped, army budgets slashed, air defenses neglected. The assumption was simple: reason would prevail. Diplomacy would replace slaughter. Civilization had learned its lesson. Then came the Treaty of Versailles. On paper, it ended the First World War. In reality, it planted the seeds of the next. Germany was stripped of territory, forced to accept blame, crushed under reparations. To many British leaders, it felt excessive, vindictive, dangerous. A peace built not on reconciliation but humiliation. So when Germany struggled, when inflation spiraled, when unemployment soared, Britain watched with unease but also sympathy. And when a fiery speaker named Adolf Hitler began shouting about restoring German pride, British observers didn't immediately hear a monster. They heard a grievance, one they thought they understood. Hitler promised to tear up Versailles, to rebuild Germany's army, to stand against communism, which British leaders feared far more than nationalism. To them, Bolshevism looked like chaos, revolution spreading westward, threatening order, property, empire. A strong Germany, they reasoned, might be a useful barrier. And so, when Hitler tested the limits, Britain hesitated. 1936, German troops march into the Rhineland, territory forbidden by treaty. The move is risky. Hitler later admits that if the French had responded militarily, he would have retreated. But Britain does nothing. Many in London argue Germany is merely walking into its own backyard. 1937, Germany absorbs Austria. Again, Britain protests, but does not act. Austria, many argue, is German anyway. Better not to fight over borders drawn by diplomats. Then comes Czechoslovakia. At Munich, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain meets Hitler face to face. The Sudetenland, Hitler claims, must be German. Chamberlain wants peace so badly he is willing to believe him. He signs an agreement. He returns to London waving a piece of paper. Peace for our time. Crowds cheer. Newspapers celebrate. For a brief moment, Britain believes it has escaped the abyss. But appeasement is not peace. It is a gamble. Behind the scenes, British intelligence grows uneasy. Hitler does not stop. He absorbs the rest of Czechoslovakia, a country he had promised to respect. The lie is now undeniable. This is no longer about Germans living under foreign rule. This is conquest. In March 1939, Britain draws a line, a fragile one but a line nonetheless. Poland. Britain guarantees Polish independence, not because Poland is easy to defend, it isn't, but because credibility is running out. If Britain backs down again, every promise becomes meaningless, every ally expendable, every treaty worthless. Still, even now, there is hope. Hope that the threat alone will stop Hitler. Hope that words can succeed where armies have failed. Then on September 1st, 1939, German forces cross into Poland. Tanks roll, aircraft scream overhead, cities burn. Britain sends an ultimatum to Berlin: withdraw or there will be war. The hours tick by, the radios stay silent, no reply comes. And in that silence, Britain realizes something terrible. Peace has already failed. Chamberlain steps to the microphone not as a warmonger, but as a man who has run out of choices. Britain does not declare war because it wants to fight. It declares war because the alternative, surrendering Europe to force, would mean living in a world where no promise matters and no small nation is safe. Yet even as the words are spoken, uncertainty hangs in the air. Britain is not ready, its army is small, its air defenses incomplete, its people traumatized by memory. And now, once again, the drums of war are beating. But what Britain does not yet know, what no one listening to that broadcast can yet see, is that this reluctant decision will place the country on a path where it will soon stand alone, facing the most powerful war machine Europe has ever known. The declaration echoes outward, far beyond London. In Berlin, the news is received without shock. Adolf Hitler barely reacts. He had expected Britain to bluff or back down. For years, it always had. Now, suddenly, it hadn't. Yet even now, he believes the war in the West will be brief, or perhaps not fought at all. In Britain, there is no rush to the trenches, no immediate clash of armies. Instead, something stranger settles in. Waiting. The weeks after September 3rd become known as the Phony War. Soldiers dig in along the French border. Civilians tape windows, carry gas masks, practice blackouts. Sirens wail and then fall silent. Nothing happens, and that silence becomes unsettling in its own way. You can feel it in the air, a sense that Britain has stepped onto a bridge it can no longer retreat from, without yet knowing what lies on the other side. Behind the calm, the truth is grim. Britain's army is small, barely capable of defending the home islands, let alone fighting a continental war. Much of its equipment is outdated. Anti-aircraft defenses are thin. Fighter squadrons are still being trained. Factories are only just beginning to rearm at full speed. Appeasement, it turns out, did buy time, but not nearly enough. Yet that time matters. In airfields across southern England, engineers work around the clock. Radar stations, once experimental, now form a fragile early warning chain along the coast. Fighter Command reorganizes under Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, quietly preparing for a battle no one yet names. Because deep down, British planners know something the public does not want to hear. Germany will come. The decision to go to war in 1939 was not driven by confidence. It was driven by fear of delay. British leaders understood that every year Hitler remained unchecked, Germany grew stronger. More tanks, more aircraft, more trained divisions. Waiting until 1940 or 1941 would mean fighting an enemy nearly impossible to stop. And there was another fear, one less spoken but deeply felt. If Britain did not fight in 1939, it might never fight at all. A Nazi-dominated Europe would control the continent's industry, manpower, and coastline. German aircraft stationed in France. German submarines operating from Atlantic ports. Trade routes strangled. The empire isolated. Britain reduced from a world power to a besieged island, negotiating survival on Hitler's terms. War now, leaders believed, was terrible. War later would be fatal. Still, none of this makes the waiting easier. Across Britain, families adjust to a new rhythm. Children are evacuated from cities, clutching labels pinned to their coats. Trains pull away packed with confusion and tears. Parents wave until the platforms are empty, wondering if they will ever see their children in the same world again. Blackout curtains go up, streetlights vanish. London becomes a city of shadows. People listen for aircraft that never arrive yet. And beneath it all, memory whispers. They remember 1914, the optimism, the promises of a short war. They remember how wrong that had been. Which is why, when Germany suddenly strikes west in the spring of 1940, the shock feels both sudden and inevitable. The German army does not crawl forward, it explodes across Europe. The Netherlands fall, Belgium collapses, France, the great continental power Britain relies upon, shatters in weeks. Panzer divisions punch through forests thought impassable. Allied lines crumble. Command collapses. Retreat turns to chaos. Suddenly, Britain's decision in 1939 no longer feels theoretical. It is real, immediate, existential. The British Expeditionary Force is pushed back to the sea, trapped, surrounded, waiting for annihilation on the beaches of Dunkirk. In London, the government stares at maps in disbelief. This was not how it was supposed to go. France was supposed to hold. Time was supposed to be on Britain's side. Instead, Britain now faces a nightmare scenario, fighting alone. Appeasement is over, diplomacy has failed, Europe is falling. And now the question Britain tried so desperately to avoid finally demands an answer. Can the island survive? Because the choice made in September 1939 has led here, to a moment where Britain must either fight on, against overwhelming odds, or seek terms from a dictator who has broken every promise he ever made. As German forces close in on the Channel coast, Hitler turns his gaze toward the sea. Across that narrow strip of water lies the prize he has always underestimated. And Britain, bruised but unbroken, prepares for the next chapter, one that will test not just its army or its government, but the will of its people to endure what is coming. May 26, 1940. The beaches of Dunkirk, northern France. Smoke crawls across the sand, thick and black, stinging the eyes. The sound never stops, artillery thumping inland, aircraft screaming overhead, men shouting for orders that no longer exist. Tens of thousands of British soldiers are packed shoulder to shoulder along the shoreline, boots soaked, rifles useless against the sky. They are trapped, waiting for boats that may never come. From the air, German pilots look down at a sight that should mean total victory. Yet somehow, impossibly, evacuation begins. Fishing boats, pleasure craft, tugboats, anything that floats. They cross the channel again and again under fire, lifting an army off the edge of annihilation. It will later be called a miracle. At the time, it feels like desperation dressed as hope. When the last ships pull away, Britain has saved most of its soldiers, but left behind nearly all its heavy equipment. Tanks, guns, vehicles. The tools of modern war now lie scattered across French sand. Britain has an army, but barely an army that can fight. Worse still, France collapses, Paris falls, the French government sues for peace. The Channel coast is suddenly in German hands. For the first time in centuries, Britain faces the possibility of invasion. And this is where the true meaning of September 1939 becomes clear. Had Britain not gone to war when it did, had it waited, hesitated, bargained, it would now stand alone anyway, but weaker, isolated, surrounded by a continent already lost. Instead, it stands battered but committed. In London, Neville Chamberlain is gone. His faith in appeasement has shattered along with France. A new prime minister takes his place, Winston Churchill. Not a consensus choice, not a man of calm reassurance, but a man who understands something vital. This war will not be won quickly or cheaply, or easily. In the House of Commons, Churchill speaks words that cut through illusion. "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." No promises of peace, no shortcuts, no comforting lies. Outside Parliament, Britain braces itself. Air raid sirens become part of daily life. Fighter command scrambles again and again. Pilots climb into cockpits knowing that if they lose control, there will be no parachute time. Radar operators track blips moving closer across the channel. Doubting system, fragile, incomplete, begins to prove its worth. The Luftwaffe comes in waves. What follows will be remembered as the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign fought entirely in the air. Germany believes air superiority will break Britain's will, destroy its defenses, and clear the way for invasion. But the country that went to war reluctantly now discovers something unexpected about itself. It refuses to yield. Factories work through the night repairing aircraft faster than Germany can destroy them. Pilots return to the sky exhausted, wounded, flying again because there is no one else. Civilians shelter underground while cities burn above them, and still, the factories keep running. This is the consequence of the decision made in 1939. Britain did not go to war because it was ready. It went to war because waiting meant surrender. Now, with Europe under Nazi control, that decision has stripped away all illusions. There is no negotiating left, no appeasing left, only survival. And as the smoke rises over London, Hitler begins to realize something his generals had warned him about, something he never truly believed. Britain is not beaten. But the danger is not over. The invasion plans are drawn up, barges gather in ports, bombers regroup. The narrow strip of water between Britain and Europe has never felt so small. And the question that began in 1939, why fight at all, now evolves into something far more urgent. Can Britain endure long enough for help to arrive? September 7, 1940. Early evening, London. The first bombs fall as commuters are still on the streets. They whistle down through the clouds, then tear into neighborhoods without warning: docks, warehouses, rows of terraced houses. Fireballs punch holes in the city. The ground shakes, windows implode. Somewhere a gas main ignites and the sky glows orange. The Blitz has begun. For 57 consecutive nights, German bombers return, sometimes in waves, sometimes alone, drifting in like ghosts. The Luftwaffe is no longer targeting airfields, it is targeting people, morale, memory, fear. And yet, something unexpected happens. London does not break. Firefighters climb into burning buildings knowing the next bomb could land beside them. Bus drivers return to routes lined with rubble. Shopkeepers reopen with plywood over shattered windows. In the underground stations, families sleep shoulder to shoulder on concrete platforms, emerging each morning to count the damage and carry on. You can almost feel it, a hardening resolve, forged not by speeches but by survival. This is when Britain truly understands why it went to war. Not for treaties, not for borders, but because surrender would mean living under this forever. Hitler had offered Britain peace terms earlier, generous ones on the surface: keep the empire, avoid destruction, accept German dominance of Europe. But now, as the bombs fall, the offer is exposed for what it really is: submission. And Britain, having crossed the line in 1939, cannot go back. The cost is already too high, the blood already spilled, the cities already burning. Across the Atlantic, another audience is watching. In the United States, newspapers print photographs of London in flames. President Franklin D. Roosevelt listens to Churchill's broadcasts crackling over the radio. Public opinion shifts slowly, reluctantly. America is not at war, but it is no longer indifferent. Britain holds on, night after night, not knowing whether help will come in time. But this endurance, this refusal to collapse changes everything. Germany fails to gain air superiority. Invasion plans are postponed, then quietly abandoned. Operation Sea Lion fades into the background, never officially cancelled but never attempted. The war that Britain entered unwillingly in 1939 has now become something else entirely. A stand. Had Britain not declared war when it did, had it waited until Poland was crushed, until France was gone, until Germany controlled every Atlantic port, this moment would never have happened. There would have been no RAF to fight, no radar chain to warn, no government willing to resist. The decision to fight early, when the odds looked terrible but not yet impossible, is the reason Britain is still standing now. By late 1940, the danger remains immense. U-boats stalk the Atlantic, bombing continues, resources are stretched thin. But the unthinkable has happened. Britain has survived the first test. And in doing so, it has transformed the meaning of that broadcast on September 3, 1939. What began as a reluctant declaration has become a defining moment, one that will shape the entire war to come. Because somewhere beyond the horizon, forces are gathering. Factories in America are waking up. New alliances are forming. Plans are being drawn that will one day bring armies back across the Channel. Britain does not know when the war will end. But it knows now with absolute clarity why it chose to fight. And the consequences of that choice are about to reshape the world. Winter 1940. The Channel coast. Cold winds sweep across concrete bunkers newly stamped with German eagles. Across the water, Britain lies darkened under blackout, battered, rationed, exhausted, but still free. This is the moment history pivots on. Because Britain's decision in 1939 was never just about Poland, or treaties, or borders drawn on maps. It was about whether force would become the law of Europe, and whether resistance still mattered in a world that seemed to reward only the ruthless. By choosing war early, Britain preserved something fragile but decisive: time. Time for radar to mature. Time for pilots to be trained. Time for factories to outproduce fear. Time for the world, especially the United States, to see what was truly at stake. Had Britain delayed, even by a year, the balance would have shifted beyond recovery. A Europe unified under Nazi control would have been impregnable. No foothold, no base, no second chance. Instead, Britain became the anvil. It absorbed the blows, the losses, the terror from the air and the sea. And by surviving, it made something else possible: a future counterattack, a return to the continent, a war that could still be won. Years later, Allied soldiers would land on the beaches of Normandy. American industry would flood the world with steel and aircraft. The Soviet Union would grind the German army into dust in the east. The war would end not in compromise, but in defeat for Nazi Germany. All of that begins here, with a tired man at a microphone, with a country that did not want war, but chose it anyway, with the understanding that some dangers grow worse the longer they are ignored. Britain went to war in 1939 not because it was strong, but because it understood something terrifyingly simple: that there are moments in history when refusing to fight guarantees a greater war later, one fought on far worse terms. And so Britain fought early, reluctantly, imperfectly, but decisively. That choice did not spare it from suffering, but it spared the world from something far darker. Years later, long after the air raids fade and the ruins are cleared, Britain will look back on September 1939 with a mixture of pride and quiet sorrow. Because the truth is this: declaring war did not save Britain from pain, it guaranteed it. Ration books would become a way of life. Cities would burn. Merchant sailors would vanish into the Atlantic without graves. Young men who had grown up hearing "never again" would fight anyway over Normandy hedgerows, in North African deserts, in the skies above Europe. Yet history would confirm what leaders only sensed in fear back then. That moment could not be postponed. By standing firm when Poland fell, Britain forced the conflict into the open before Nazi power reached its peak. It denied Germany total control of Europe's coastline. It preserved a free base from which resistance could grow. It gave the world a visible alternative to submission. For occupied nations, Britain's survival became a signal. The war was not over. For the United States, it became proof that the fight was not hopeless. For Hitler, it became the one enemy he could never quite break, the mistake he never fully recovered from. And for Britain itself, the war transformed the country forever. The empire would shrink, the economy would strain, the old world would pass away, but something else would endure: the idea that choosing resistance, even when weak, can change the course of history. That is why Britain went to war in 1939. Not because it believed victory was certain, not because it wanted glory, but because the cost of inaction had finally become greater than the cost of war. On that gray September morning, Britain stepped into the dark without knowing how long the night would last. What it did know, instinctively, painfully, was that some lines once crossed must be answered. And that decision, made with hesitation and fear, would echo through every battle, every bombing raid, every grave, and ultimately through the freedom of a continent. September 1945. London. Church bells ring again, not as warnings but as release. Crowds fill the streets, cheering, laughing, crying in the same breath. The war is over. Nazi Germany is defeated. The danger that once seemed unstoppable is gone. Yet beneath the celebration lies something quieter. Reflection. Because victory does not erase memory. Britain remembers how close it came, how thin the margin truly was, how easily history could have bent the other way if different choices had been made, if fear had spoken louder than resolve in 1939. In government offices and private homes, people begin asking the same question, over and over again. What if we had? What if Britain had stayed out? What if it had accepted Germany's victories as someone else's problem? What if Poland had been abandoned like Czechoslovakia before it? The answer becomes clearer with time. There would have been no safe Atlantic crossing, no base for D-Day, no sustained bombing campaign, no place for free governments in exile to survive. Without Britain's early stand, the war would not simply have been longer, it would have been unwinnable. This is the final truth behind the decision of 1939. Britain did not stop the war, but it stopped the war from becoming permanent. The country paid a heavy price for that choice. Cities were scarred, families were broken, power and empire slipped away in the decades that followed. Yet Britain emerged with something far more durable than territory: moral authority. The knowledge that when the moment came, when compromise became surrender, it chose resistance. History does not remember Britain in 1939 as strong. It remembers Britain as stubborn. And sometimes, stubbornness is enough to change the world. Because on that gray morning in September, when a tired voice spoke into a microphone and a nation braced itself for the worst, Britain made a decision that echoed far beyond its shores. A decision not to wait, not to hope, not to look away. A decision to fight before it was too late. Decades later, the streets of London look different. The scars are harder to see now. Buildings have been rebuilt. Sirens no longer wail at night. The children who once slept in underground stations are grandparents, telling stories that sound unreal to younger ears. But the decision of 1939 still lingers, not as a date in a textbook, but as a warning. Because Britain's choice to go to war was not a moment of clarity. It was a moment of doubt, of fear, of knowing that every option was bad and choosing the one that was least destructive in the long run. That is what makes it enduring. Britain went to war knowing it was unready, knowing it might lose, knowing the price would be terrible. Yet it also understood something history teaches again and again. Aggression feeds on hesitation. Every delay strengthens the aggressor. Every compromise teaches the lesson that force works. The men and women of 1939 did not have the benefit of hindsight. They did not know America would enter the war. They did not know Germany would be defeated. They did not know victory was even possible. All they knew was that the world they were watching emerge, a world ruled by threats, invasions, and broken promises, was one they could not safely live in. So they acted, not boldly, not confidently, but decisively. And that is why Britain's declaration of war still matters. It reminds us that history is not shaped only by heroes charging forward, but by ordinary societies reaching a breaking point, when the fear of action is finally outweighed by the fear of doing nothing. In 1939, Britain crossed that line. And once crossed, there was no turning back.